I was attracting kids from all over. Some of them turned out to be Adam and Lorca, they were called. They loved jumping in the sea with me and fishing and selling grapes to the tourists who passed by. Adam, of course, was a chip off the old block in a way. But he had his sister to look after, Lorca, who was a year or two younger than him. But Leonard had told him, take care of your sister, Adam. Every time they came to the island, and their dad wasn't around, they would leave their mother, Suzanne, in the port. Directly they got off the boat and they would run all the way to the village where I lived and burst in on me. First Adam, because he could run faster than his sister, you see. And we had to check up to see if Don was still around, to see if the toys they'd left in my house, in my shack, were still where they'd left them, you know. So I'd be sitting in my fisherman's shack, and flying in through the door came Adam, puffing and panting. Jesus, he'd say, you're still here. And I'd say, well, where else would I be, Adam? And he'd look up and all around my old kitchen, and he'd see the boat he'd left, an old wooden boat. He said, the boat's still here too. And I'd say, yep. Then he'd look at all the other toys that they'd left behind, I'd gathered together and put in a box. He'd sit down and say, it's so great to be back, Don. And still, you're still here. Then after we'd talking for a bit, I'd hear the little footsteps outside the house, and in would come Lorca. And he'd say, Lorca, nothing's changed in here. And she'd look around a bit critically and said, it's got smaller. And Adam would say to her with a big sigh, Lorca, it's not got smaller. You've got bigger. And of course, that always made me smile. Yeah, and Adam used to throw himself into the sea with me when I went hunting octopus. And he couldn't swim. That was an amazing thing. I'd be in deep water looking for octopus with my mask and snorkel, and all of a sudden, I'd hear a splash, and these arms would clutch at my neck and almost pull me under, you know, and I'd be grappling to save both our lives. And he'd be saying, Don, 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 I'm swimming like you. Where's the octopus? And of course, he could never see them. But as he once told me later, that he preferred tuna fish anyway. He loved tuna fish. That's, you know. Whenever he saw tuna fish or he was eating it, he'd go, tuna fish. Ain't it great, God? I remember one day when I was writing on my makeshift table and chair outside the house, the letter N fell off of my old typewriter. And I thought, shit, how can I carry on with this typewriter if I haven't got the full alphabet to use on the machine? Well, for a while, I wrote in every N that was left out in the book. There's a lot of N's, dear reader, when you think about it. And so I happened to mention to little Lorca, who was about 3 or 4 years old, my typewriter's broken. What shall I do? And she said, my dad's got several old typewriters in our house. Maybe you can use one of them, Don. I said, yes, but he probably needs them. She said, oh no, he's got 2 or 3, I think. Well, I thought no more about it because I didn't like to burden anyone. But I came back one day and I found this typewriter sitting on my doorstep. And little Lorca had carried it down the hill from her place and placed it there. And it's the one I've been using ever since. One day I said, Adam, let's set up shop and sell a few grapes to the tourists as they pass by. And he said, yeah. So we picked some grapes. We set up our little boxes outside my shack on the path where the tourists went to swim. And we'd sit there and a few come along. And he'd rush up and say, we got grapes. And we sold a couple. And then who do we see coming up the path but Lorca? And his face dropped. And he looked at me and I looked at him. And he said, she ain't coming in our shop. She heard that and she just stood there. And he said, Lorca, you can't play the grape seller with us. She didn't say anything. She turned around and went back to Leonard's house, where they also had a grape arbor. She picked a few bunches, put them in a basket, came back again, and set up a shop just 5 yards away. So Adam said, you can't come in our shop, Lorca. So she moved another 5 yards away. And that sort of held the peace for a while. And we sold a few more bunches. She wasn't doing so good because they had to pass our grapes first, you see, before they got to her grapes. So to entice a tourist or two to her shop, she started singing, my grapes are better than your grapes. Of course, when Adam heard that, he stood up and he said, Don, do you hear what she's saying? Lorca, get out of here. Go down there 100 yards away. That's how it was, you know. Yeah, it was very funny. We were in competition. And that was my grapes are better than yours. He got furious at Adam. Of course, I got quite a kick out of it too, but I mean, this to me was the ideal education, not just for the kids, but for me as well. Little Lorca, she's always been very sweet with me when I've seen her now. She's a woman with children. She always comes at me like she hasn't forgotten a thing. Adam, he's become a bit more professional now. But he's still a sweet guy.